There comes a strange moment in life when nothing has completely fallen apart, but something inside you already knows you can't keep living the same way anymore. And maybe that's happening right now. You still wake up, still answer messages, still go to work, still smile when necessary. But there's a feeling that's hard to explain, as if your presence has started pulling away from your own life, as if your body is still here, but some deeper part of you has already crossed an invisible door. And the most unsettling part is that almost nobody notices this happening, because on the outside, your life still looks normal, but on the inside, something is silently breaking apart. Not transition, rupture, like an old structure can no longer support the weight of who you've become internally. Maybe that's why you've been tired in such a strange way, not just physically tired of carrying versions of yourself that no longer feel true. And this affects the body. Neuroscience shows that the human brain spends enormous energy trying to maintain internal coherence. When your external identity conflicts with what your consciousness has already realized, the nervous system enters constant tension. Your body stays on alert. Your mind speeds up. Your chest tightens. Your sleep changes. Your breathing shortens, because the organism senses something needs to change, even if you still don't know what. And maybe the most important thing is this: it doesn't necessarily mean you're broken. Maybe it simply means your soul has reached the limit of the old structure. And today, you're going to understand why this happens. What Jesus taught about inner transformation without modern language. What happens in the brain during identity ruptures. And why this silent restlessness may not be anxiety, but a sign that your life is about to divide into two completely different versions. One keeps sleeping inside repetition, the other crosses the threshold. There's a concept called bifurcation theory in physics, in mathematics, in nature. It describes the moment when a system receives so much pressure that remaining the same becomes impossible. Up to a certain point, the system compensates, adapts, tolerates, pretends stability, but eventually, small internal fractures begin announcing an inevitable change. Nature works like this. The body works like this. The mind works like this. And maybe your life is working like this right now. You try to keep going, but what once felt tolerable now starts suffocating you. Conversations feel exhausting, environments drain you, routines feel heavy for no clear reason, and maybe you've been calling this confusion, but something deeper is happening. Your brain changes when your perception changes. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity. Every repeated thought strengthens neural circuits. Every sustained emotion reorganizes internal connections. Every experience alters the way you perceive reality. But there's something even deeper. Your brain does not seek happiness first. It seeks familiarity. Even patterns that hurt you can feel biologically safe, because the nervous system interprets repetition as survival. That's why so many people stay for years in empty relationships, dead-end jobs, old versions of themselves. What's familiar calms the brain, even when it slowly destroys the soul. And Jesus taught this in an almost unbelievably profound way when he says, "No one pours new wine into old wineskins." He wasn't only talking about containers, he was describing human consciousness, because when something new is born inside you, the old structure begins to collapse, and the mistake many people make is trying to save the old wineskin, trying to fit back into environments that no longer match who they've become. But notice this. Suffering increases when your consciousness evolves, while your life remains trapped in the past. That's why you feel this silent estrangement. Your body is still in the old place, but your consciousness has already begun leaving it. Life rarely warns you loudly. First, it whispers, in the body, in the breath, in the strange emptiness between one thought and the next. And there are very specific signs when an old identity begins to die. The first sign is the feeling of silent disconnection. You're in familiar places, but everything feels emotionally distant, as if you're watching your own life from far away. You hear people talking, but something inside you thinks, this no longer reaches me. And that's frightening, because it feels like loneliness. But many times, it's internal expansion. The second sign is unexplained exhaustion, not just physical, existential. Your body begins getting tired of the effort required to sustain an identity that no longer feels true. Physiology feels this. The nervous system enters hyper-alertness. Cortisol remains elevated. The muscles stay tense. The brain consumes energy trying to maintain emotional control. And slowly, you feel exhausted even without doing much. The third sign is the loss of pleasure in old stimuli. Things that once excited you now feel empty, because the brain stops releasing emotional intensity toward what no longer represents inner growth. And this confuses many people, because they think, I'm losing the will to live, when maybe they're simply losing connection with an old identity. The fourth sign is recurring thoughts about starting over, changing everything, disappearing, breathing different air, ending cycles, letting go. And maybe the strangest part is that this appears during the most ordinary moments. Washing dishes, driving home, looking out the bus window, sitting in traffic, lying in the dark before sleep, as if your soul were trying to get your attention in the middle of routine. The fifth sign, your dreams become more intense. Doors, deep waters, old houses, roads, people from the past. Depth psychology understands this as unconscious identity reorganization. Your subconscious begins processing what your conscious mind still resists accepting. And the sixth sign, perhaps the strongest of all, is that you begin to realize staying the same hurts more than changing. And that's the dangerous point, because this is exactly where life begins to divide. There's a very profound scene in the teachings of Jesus. He encounters a paralyzed man, and before healing him, asks a disturbing question. Do you want to be healed? Think about that. The question seems absurd, but Jesus was revealing something about the human mind. There's a part of us that becomes accustomed to its own captivity. The brain turns repetition into identity. Even pain can feel safe when it's been familiar for too long. That's why so many people defend the very patterns that hurt them, because change threatens the character they learned to become. And this isn't only spiritual, it's neurological. Every identity creates predictable brain circuits. Your brain learns, this is how we survive. So when you try to change, the nervous system reacts as if facing danger. That's why true transformation creates physical symptoms: anxiety, confusion, emotional instability, fear without explanation. Your body interprets the unknown as threat, even when your consciousness knows remaining the same is slowly destroying you. And maybe that's why Jesus spoke so often about being born again, because there are moments when the old version of you cannot cross into the next stage of life. It must symbolically die. And that hurts, because nobody crosses a deep transformation while carrying the old identity intact. There's a phase of transformation almost nobody explains correctly. The void, the in-between, the territory between two identities. You can no longer fully return to who you were, but you still don't know who you're becoming. And maybe this is one of the most disorienting experiences of human life, because the brain loves predictability. But true growth almost always begins in disorganization. In biology, there's something astonishing. Before a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it practically dissolves inside the cocoon. For a period, it becomes matter in reorganization, without defined form, without the old structure. Now imagine that emotionally. Maybe you are exactly there, without clarity, without direction, without belonging, and interpreting that as failure, when maybe it's deep reconstruction. Neuroscience shows that during major inner changes, the brain weakens old connections before consolidating new neural networks. And this creates psychological estrangement, as if you were without internal reference, without access, without a self. And many people return to their old life exactly here, not because it was better, but because the void feels too frightening, because at least the old suffering was familiar. But maybe, for the first time, you're beginning to realize the automatic was never peace. It was only repetition. There comes a moment when your life silently begins splitting into two paths. Path A is staying the same. You continue, adapt, learn to survive. From the outside, it looks like stability, but slowly, something begins disappearing. You laugh less, feel less, dream less, and without noticing, you become functional on the outside and absent on the inside. This is the danger of emotional adaptation. Human beings can survive in almost any environment, even environments that slowly destroy the soul. And then there's path B, the path of crossing over, which does not begin with certainty. It begins with discomfort. You cannot see the entire map, only the next step, and that deeply terrifies the brain, because the brain prefers predictable suffering over the unknown. But there's something almost nobody realizes. The cost of remaining small eventually becomes greater than the cost of changing. And maybe your body already realized that before your mind did. Maybe that's why you've been restless, because some deep part of you already knows staying the same has become too expensive. I once knew someone who spent months believing they were falling into depression. They kept working normally, answering messages, smiling, fulfilling responsibilities, but every day they would sit silently in the car for a few minutes before entering work, because something inside them was crying quietly. It wasn't laziness, it wasn't weakness, it was internal rupture. That life still existed externally, but it had already ended inside them. And the saddest part was that nobody noticed, because the greatest human transformations almost always happen in silence, without announcement, without applause, without witnesses, only you, and this strange feeling that your soul is trying to breathe inside a space that has become too small. Maybe you understand that exactly. There's another teaching of Jesus that is almost always interpreted superficially. No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back. Notice the depth of that. Jesus was speaking about inner direction, because the human brain loses strength when trying to live in two identities at the same time. Part of the energy stays trapped in the past, Another part tries to build the future, and that division creates anxiety, confusion, emotional exhaustion. You feel it in the body, in the shallow breathing, in the hyperactive mind, in the constant tension, because sustained attention shapes perception. What you continuously feed strengthens neural networks, strengthens behavior, strengthens identity. That's why Jesus insisted so much on inner vigilance, because repeated consciousness becomes pathway. And maybe what's missing in your life is not strength, maybe it's alignment. So now, for a few seconds, don't try to solve everything. Just allow your body to breathe, because maybe you've spent too much time surviving in a state of alertness. Too much time trying to control everything, too much time fighting what you already feel. And pray this with me, not as ritual, but as inner openness. Jesus, if there is a new part of me trying to be born, help me not run from it. I'm tired of surviving inside structures that can no longer contain who I'm becoming. Teach me to recognize what has ended, without fear, to cross the unknown, without abandoning my essence, and calm my internal system. Teach my body that transformation does not mean destruction. If my life is truly dividing right now, give me clarity to choose what brings me closer to truth, even if it's uncomfortable, even if I still can't see everything. Now notice something important. Deep prayers alter physiology. Breathing slows. The nervous system reduces hyper-alertness. The brain exits constant threat mode. And slowly, clarity begins to emerge. Because when the body stops fighting the soul, something inside you finally becomes able to listen. Maybe your life is not falling apart. Maybe it's reorganizing itself. Maybe this emptiness, this estrangement, this silent exhaustion are not the end. Maybe they are the beginning, because there comes a moment when remaining the same starts hurting more than crossing into the unknown. And maybe that moment has arrived for you. But there's something you need to remember. Fear does not always mean you are on the wrong path. Sometimes fear is simply the old version of you realizing it will not be able to cross the next door. And maybe the greatest risk in life is not failure. Maybe it's reaching the end of it without ever meeting the person you could have become. So if this message found exactly what you're living through, write in the comments, I see the crossing, not as performance, not as empty motivation, but as silent recognition. Because sometimes, the first step of transformation is simply admitting the old version of you can no longer lead your life. Today you realize that your mind responds to what you repeat, and that the teachings of Jesus aren't just inspiration, they are direction for your consciousness. They shape maturity, they build discernment, they develop a stable mind, one that isn't dependent on circumstances. But transformation doesn't happen just because you understand something. It begins with a decision, and it's solidified through small actions, repeated every single day. A video can awaken you, but consistency is what rewires you. That's how the mind is reprogrammed. That's how emotional independence is formed. That's how you move out of internal scarcity and begin to live with clarity, stability, and abundance of awareness. And from that abundance comes a lighter life, more inwardly prosperous, less controlled by fear, more aligned with purpose. Now here's the turning point. If you leave this moment and change nothing, your mind will keep reinforcing yesterday's pathways. And yesterday's pathways produce yesterday's results. But if you begin today, Even with one simple step, a new structure starts to form. What you do in the next 24 hours begins shaping the direction of the next few months. If you want to step out of the anxiety cycle, if you want to anchor your mind in truth daily and build a life that feels steady, light, and inwardly prosperous, I've organized a practical path to help you do exactly that. This isn't about more information. It's about training. It's about guided consistency. It's about intentionally rewiring your mind. If something in you resonated with this, don't ignore that pull. If you feel ready to go deeper, access is available through the link in the description. Not because you need to buy something, but because this might be the moment you choose to begin differently. It's a next step, but it could be the beginning of an entirely new internal foundation.